Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Braid webinar, Braid using storytelling to promote social learning. I'm Ashwati Iyer, and I am the Associate Director for Software Licensing and Research Partnerships at the University of Michigan. I'm also joined by my colleague and co-host, Will Wrong, who will be moderating the Q&A. Will, wave if you can hear me. So Braid is an open source and open access ed tech platform that's developed at the University of Michigan by the Public Interest Technology Knowledge Network, or the PITKN team. Today, we'll have three speakers talking about the pedagogical underpinnings of Braid and their experiences using the platform. Raymar Hampshire, who's the product lead of Braid and whom a lot of you probably already know, will talk about the pedagogical underpinnings of the tool, of how they think about using storytelling as a tool for promoting learning. Dom Adam Santos, who is the managing director of the Center for Racial Justice at the Ford School of Public Policy, will talk about how she uses Braid in one of the courses that she teaches. And Ting Fong Chen, or TF Chen, who is the co-president of a really great student club, Tech for Social Good at the University of Michigan, will talk about how they use Braid for their projects as well as an upcoming hackathon. The webinar today is brought to you in partnership with a new pilot initiative at the University of Michigan called MOS, Michigan Open Source Software. MOS supports open source projects such as Braid with promotion and community development efforts, this webinar being one of them, with the goal of equipping teams with the tools and resources to grow and sustain an active community. Having an active community is critical to better position these open source projects for sustainable outcomes, such as open source specific funding, open source spinouts, hosting by open source foundations, or innovative open source licensing models. If you're interested in learning more about MOS, reach out to me directly. You've been getting emails from me about the webinar, or you can visit this website over here. I'll be sharing the slide deck with you after the webinar. And then a couple of logistical items, and then I'll hand it over to Raymar. If you have any questions, please use the chat or the Q&A functionality. We'll have time at the end of the webinar to answer all of your questions. And the second logistical item is we thought we'd do something fun. So we had a webinar pre-activity for you to basically sign up on Braid and explore the platform and give a go at using it. Will shared details about the pre-activity via email, but he'll share it again in the chat for those of you that missed the email or registered for the webinar in the past 24 hours. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Raymar. Raymar, take it away.
Thank you, Ashwati. Such a pleasure to be here on this webinar. I look forward to over the next, 45 minutes or so, just giving you a sense of our project, giving you a sense of some of the history related to our work, and then highlighting a few of the use cases that we're experiencing right now using Braid. So yeah, really excited to just dive right in. Um, just by way of introduction, uh, my name is Raymar Hampshire. I'm the product lead here at Braid. Um, just a little bit of background on me in the spirit of storytelling. I'm from Ohio. I actually grew up. This might be much to the chagrin of some of our Ohio natives, maybe in the audience, but I grew up a Michigan fan, rooting for University of Michigan. It's so wonderful that I am actually here at the university for the last 5 years. So it's sort of a full circle moment for me. But I'm a proud Ohio native, proud Midwest native. I grew up fascinated with storytelling, into comic books. I have, one of my favorite comic books, they're Static. And then as a child, reading these choose your own adventure books, and really being immersed in sort of the storytelling growing up as a child. I've been into computers since a very young age. This is a picture of me in middle school, actually. this was a science fair, and my mother, and my dad, they were both teachers in the public schools, but they were able to purchase these Intel kits that were specifically designed for teachers during that time. So I'm dating myself a bit, but this is the science fair where I got a chance to really show off some of the Intel kits and the wafers, the silicon wafers. And I have my computer right there as well. It took a lot of this energy with the storytelling and technology. I enrolled at Heinz College at Carnegie Mellon University to pursue a master's in information systems and public policy. Um, since from then, I went into consulting, specifically into technology consulting. Worked at a national nonprofit organization called My Brother's Keeper Alliance, which is now part of the Obama Foundation, and even experimented and sort of jumped into this world of entrepreneurism by starting up a firm with a couple partners. Um, and then I got this wonderful opportunity back in 2019 to join University of Michigan as part of the grant for public interest technology. Um, and our project, we started off as a research project. And so I'll get into a little bit more about the research that we've done since 2019 and sort of how that research has evolved into what you see here with Braid. Um, so at the end of the day, I'm a tech nerd born in Ohio. I love stories and I love building software to help people. Um, and I couldn't do this without our wonderful team. Our team goes back to 2019 with actually my brother Robert Hampshire, who was our founding principal investigator, Tayo Fabusui, who's our current principal investigator, and so many others who have been contributing to this project from day one up until now, which is our Tech for Social Good student project team who TF is on the webinar. He'll be talking and introducing himself. But I get to work with some amazing students, and that's really been the most joy for this whole project is being able to work with students who are curious about how they can use their skills for good and how they can build technology that's responsible, that's inclusive, and really providing a space for them to sort of live out that curiosity and practice through our project. And so Braid, it's an educational tool and open access platform that uses storytelling to promote social learning in and outside the classroom. And so we'll be seeing some of this demonstrated during our time today. But this is, in a nutshell, what Braid is and what it aspires to be. Um, so today, I hope you guys walk away with three things. One is really an understanding of how faculty and students can use Braid to improve learning outcomes. And so Dominique Adams Santos will be talking about how she's using it in her class. TF will be talking about how they've been able to use it for their student club at Michigan. Um, so really want you all to sort of think about and kind of walk away with sort of how you might be able to use Braid in your own, on your own campus in your own classes. Secondly, providing an opportunity to practice social learning, right, by contributing to storytelling on Braid. As Ashwati mentioned at the top, we'll have a short activity that you all can participate in, and I think it will really help to sort of solidify, I think, your understanding about social learning and kind of how we're using our own personal stories to contribute to community learning and what that looks like. And then thirdly, just understanding that our project is constantly evolving, and it really is shaped by the community of users that are on Braid. And so all of that to say is that Braid, this project it's experimental. It's constantly, we're constantly iterating, adding new things, learning new things, and a lot of that learning comes directly from our community of users on Braid. Um, so I wanted to talk a little bit before we kind of dive into, some of the use case. I wanted to talk about some of the values that our team brings into the process of building Braid, this technology. I think we can kind of jump right into what Braid is, but without sort of understanding some of the ingredients that have sort of made this experience what it is. And I think, the thing that I start with is our community. And so at each phase of our product life cycle, going back to research, it's always been about inviting community members to participate. And so, in our first year, we did a lot of surveys, we did a lot of semi-structured interviews, we did a lot of sentiment analysis, understanding what people were interested in seeing in a platform like Braid. And so we continue to sort of bring people along and invite them to continue on our journey as sort of the bedrock of our project. Secondly, is building in public. We feel strongly that because we're a public interest technology project, that the public should be informed about our decisions, about how they can sort of contribute to our project. And so we do a lot to share our learning, whether that's through articles, different reports, peer-reviewed papers. We have a summary document that you all will get after this webinar. That's really just a living document of all of the different updates along the way. And so that's building in public. Um, the idea that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. I showed our team, everyone has had a part in contributing to Braid. So everything that you see from a button to where it's placed to the font, the colors, the overall scheme, there's a person behind those features. And so we really believe in this proverb of Ubuntu, which is I am because we are. And so our team is flat, um, and we really do take that very serious. The ideas come from everybody, contributions come from everybody. Having fun and celebrating who we are. We definitely celebrate by bringing our whole identities into our project because it makes it fun. There's a lot of laughter. We share our perspectives, and so we really do look to celebrate who we are while we're building technology. And then lastly, I alluded to some of this, but we're grounded in research and practice. And so our first grant in 2019 was a grant where we were looking at career pathways, specifically for underserved social entrepreneurs and how those practitioners could sort of find their way within this field of public interest technology. And so we worked with social entrepreneurs in Detroit. We put together a report that we published called Building the Career Pathways for Diverse Social Entrepreneurs. Um, and a lot of the findings around that report was that, um, there's a lot of unwritten rules in our vocations, whether you're a social entrepreneur, whether you're, a product developer, a technologist. There's a lot of just unwritten rules. And so we were really keen on this idea of like how do we create a platform where we can actually share parts of our journey with other people, being a community with other people, to sort of learn from each other. And so that was back in 2021 or so, 2022. And that was sort of the genesis for what we now have, which is Braid. Um, and the other thing I'll talk about in terms of the research is like, this idea that we think that human-centered stories um, is essentially the connected tissue that can help us, not only in our learning, but also making meaningful connections with each other, right? So when we kind of compare and contrast Braid to maybe some of the other platforms that are social, um, we definitely see Braid as an opportunity for us to be more authentic, for us to really focus and lean in on how does my story contribute to overall learning and shared understanding. And so I think that's very important to sort of mention here as we kind of progress and kind of move into some of the use cases that you guys will see later on in this webinar. I wanted to give you guys just a sense of like where we started. This is from our CTO, Payal. This is the beginning shell of what Braid has become. And so this is our alpha platform. It's called the Public Interest Technology Knowledge Network. And so as you can see here, Payout is our very first user of Braid. And so, a lot of things that have come since then have just been through a community effort. Um, and I want to touch basically just real quickly on the pedagogical approach, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dom to kind of share how she's using it in her course. Um, but as I mentioned, we're using storytelling to create these human connections that support learning. It all starts with, you know, prompts, and so we use prompts to help make tacit knowledge more explicit. And so one of the things that we're looking to establish on our platform is a scaffolding for who we are, right? And so part of that is like self-defining what makes us us. And so there's a lot of like place-based storytelling, people sharing where they're from, and what motivates us. So what are those things or those values that motivate what we do? So that's all around like the authenticity, establishing that, and then organizing storytelling that helps us organize our thoughts around specific topics and how those topics show up in our own lives. And so we'll show some examples of what that looks like as well. And then lastly, collaboration. So these are stories that share with others in our community the goals and the activities that we're currently up to, that we're working towards. Like what are we actually doing in our work, and how can we build collaboration based upon what we're all doing, right? But it all starts with authenticity, and this goes back to a sociologist. Her name is Patricia Hill Collins. She talks a lot about the importance of marginalized communities and oppressed communities specifically, and self-defining who they are. Um, and the idea that we know, more than we can sometimes share, but the idea that we have to think about how do we kind of share some of the tacit knowledge that we have and make it explicit. And so that's why we use prompts. Um, but then also this idea with epistemology and Black feminist epistemology, which is, we know things tacitly because some of us do experience some of these issues and topics in our own lives. And so, for example, with systems of inequity, for example, certain oppressed and marginalized communities understand these systems of inequity because they can feel it in their bones, right? They can really feel it in their bones. And so our platform looks to make that tacit knowledge explicit. That's expertise that individuals have, right? So you might not consider yourself a subject matter expert, but we can all consider ourselves experts of our own lived experiences. And so we try to bring uh, those two knowledge sources to the platform and really harmonize those sources and democratize knowledge. And so you'll see sort of how that plays out on our platform, in terms of our design philosophy. The headline is like there's no likes, right? So it might feel social and it might feel like social media, but there's a lot of things that we have decided not to include because we know some of the social conventions of social media are toxic, and can be harmful. And so there's no likes because all of our stories are, can stand on their own. Um, so I think I'll stop here because I want to make sure we get to everybody. So Dominique is going to be talking about some of the storytelling and some of the curriculum and the prompts that she's been using in her course. Um, and then yeah, we'll turn it over to TF afterwards to talk a little bit more about the student group.
Awesome. I'll share my screen now. Okay, let's see. Okay, perfect. I think you can all see that. Yes? Okay, perfect. Yeah, so I'm Dom Adam Santos, and I guess maybe it was over the summer that Raymar and I connected, and he shared all about Braid, and I said, absolutely, I'd love to use it for my course. And so I teach Racial Foundations of Public Policy, which is a course, an elective at the Ford School at the University of Michigan that is interesting in that I teach to both undergrads and graduate students. And so I have BAs, I have master's students, and even a handful of PhD students in the class. And amazingly, sometimes it feels like a kind of tough thing to be able to, make sure that each of those kind of constituencies, right, get something from the course. But it's been a very wonderful and enriching I'd say experience in that folks are able to draw on their professional experiences, their dissertation research, and also get the energy from undergraduates, right, of having encountered some of these ideas for the first time. So a little bit of context, similar to what Raymar was doing, right? Storytelling. So I think that it's really good to kind of ground a little bit into kind of who I am as an individual, apart from also like the roles that I have right at the university. And so I'm a first generation college student. I'm multiracial, queer, neurodivergent, and I threw this one in here too. I'm a mom of an 11-month-old, right? So I like to see, identities, not just for identity's sake, but as potential connections, right, to others. So maybe you're on the call and you're neurodivergent, or maybe you're queer, or maybe you have, kind of diverse heritage. And so all of that, I see are kind of superpowers to be able to relate to lots of different people. And you'll see in this presentation that relationships and connection and belonging are kind of cornerstones of my kind of pedagogical approach. So I'm a scholar, I'm a sociologist. Specifically, I do ethnographic research. I'm interested in urban and digital intimacies and queer placemaking, in kind of the contemporary moment, drawing on kind of historical place kind of formation. And the teaching that I do, so I'm at a policy school, and I try to bring in my background in sociology and Black studies and queer studies and women's studies to kind of a policy space, which has been very interesting, but also I think has been really well received, and I'm glad. So I'm teaching both Racial Foundations of Public Policy this semester, and I'll be teaching a course in the winter semester on gender, sexuality, and public policy. My kind of dominant hats, though, are kind of the leadership roles that I have. So as Raymar mentioned, I direct the Center for Racial Justice at the Ford School. I'm also a community and belonging kind of strategist. And more recently, if anybody's on the university's campus with the Year of Democracy, Civic Empowerment, and Global Engagement, I'm a consultant on that. So I wear lots of different hats, and I find it all wildly interesting, and I'm never bored. So, and teaching happens to be one of my highlights, and so a pleasure to talk about the course and how I use Braid with that. So the course is centered around 3 modules: foundations, cross-cutting issues, and justice. And so for foundations, that's really kind of setting up the kind of theoretical underpinnings of when we think about and study race, right? And so we spend a lot of time thinking about kind of the cultural currents of race, the structural forces that kind of give rise to the concept, of race, and also how that orients our institutions and practices and policies, et cetera. That first class, though, you'll see you spend a lot of time on kind of community aspirations, because as you can imagine, teaching about something like race, right? It's still pretty taboo. It's like everywhere, you know, in US kind of society, and also something that is treated kind of with intense kind of, yeah, taboo, and it's like kind of an untouchable kind of topic. It's like we talk about it, and you know, we also don't talk about it sometimes in very useful ways. And so spending a lot of time around community aspirations, and then building that kind of shared understanding around kind of theoretical and historical underpinnings. And then we get into cross-cutting issues, right? And these are issues that specifically span the kind of life course, right? So we intentionally start with reproduction and then move to housing, education, and we end on carcerality and punishment. And what's really great about this is that there are connections between all four kind of cross-cutting issues, right? We can't talk about what it means to be able to raise children with resources and in healthy environments without talking about housing, right? And we can't talk about education unless we talk about the ways in which our kind of educational opportunities, right, are grounded in kind of where we live, our zip codes. And carcerality absolutely has its tentacles in housing and education, where you live, what opportunities you do or do not have access to, and also the ways in which, right, educational systems, our public schools especially, right, have become kind of imbued with kind of carceral logics. And so while they're distinct, there are relationships between those four. And of course, you can imagine teaching something like this, and when you're talking about inequality, right, it builds a kind of like pent up frustration sometimes, right, especially for students encountering this. And so we end talking about justice, you know, as a kind of question, an open question of what is justice and how do people think about justice from both kind of an activism or kind of change making from the outside versus maybe a blended approach of policy and activism, right? So being able to think about change making both within systems and change making from outside of systems. And then we actually have our last class tomorrow where we're going to be doing reflections and peer review. So in terms of like, you know, my approach to teaching, it's really relational. And I won't go through all of this, but just to show that, you know, we do weekly reflections. Every week we do group work. Throughout the course, students are writing critical analysis papers. And right now, rather than kind of write a new paper, those critical analysis papers are then bundled together, and we engage in a peer review process, right, to give students the opportunity to revisit their work and get external feedback, both from me and from their peers. And they'll compile that into their final project. And this relational kind of pedagogical approach is really rooted in this quote that I've, you know, always draw inspiration from, and it's on my syllabus, which is, as a classroom community, our capacity to generate excitement is deeply affected by our interest in one another, in hearing one another's voices and recognizing one another's presence. And so that's from Bell Hooks' Teaching to Transgress. And so we start with that quote, and it's really kind of the spirit of how I approach, teaching. So, you know, we started off using Brave to think about our community aspirations, and knowing that what we were going to be embarking on together, right, would be challenging. The content, the conversations would be challenging. And so I posed this prompt to my students, you know, what does it mean to be brave in a class, right? And what empowers or invites you to be your authentic self? And so you can see, you know, students talked about being able to share their first draft thoughts, right? Which is so critical, right, to the learning process. You know, exercising your birthright to think and speak without limitation, right? And so many of our students don't feel, right, that they're empowered to do that, but to claim and then to be able to, right, exercise that birthright. Making space for others, right? And trust that, in what they can contribute. So that's a little bit of, and the cool thing about this is in responding to the prompt, they're exercising bravery, right? Yeah. So I wanted to also just mention, similar to Raymar's kind of typology, if you will, of kind of authenticity and ending with collaboration. I have my own kind of language that I use to kind of think about Braid and its integration in my class. And so the first is knowledge, right? Which is building a shared understanding of how structural and cultural racism is reinforced and challenged through laws, policies, institutions, and everyday interactions. And so I think a good illustration of that is this question on education, right? So it was during our education week. So identify one word or concept that captures the essence of the pieces we read for this week. And so it means that they're having to think really long and hard, right? About, okay, we read these 3 or 4 readings for this week, and thinking about, like what kind of feeling is that evoking, or what's a kind of concept, right, that really ties all of this together. And so everything from narrative and storytelling to displacement, disruption, and also institutional mourning, because we were reading about school closures. And so here's just a really quick kind of I thought this was fantastic, and this is a kind of longer response to the prompt. And so this person chose erasure as their word. So schools are demolished or erased from physical existence constantly, whether it be for a legitimate reason or not. Erasure also symbolizes the erasure of POC culture, representation, values, history, and education, which is what happens with many Chicago schools deemed permanent failures by school boards who don't actually care about reality, meaning that actually those were high-performing schools that were just under-resourced, right? So connection, right? Or being able to cultivate a learning community that values interdisciplinarity and lived expertise. So I had nursing students, public health students, a practicing psychologist, a PhD student who was already seeing clients. So leaning into that, right? My job isn't to make everybody into a policy scholar, right? Or a future policy researcher or analyst, but how can you apply what we're learning to what it is you do beyond, this class? And also, what of your experiences can you offer to enrich our learning experience? So in this prompt, I asked students to reflect on their schooling experiences, and I had students who were, private school background versus, public school, charter schools. So it required them to think back, right, to their childhoods. And so they got to reflect on the ways in which, there was increased police presence or zero tolerance policies, right? Making that connection that when we think about carcerality, we're not simply talking about jails and prisons, right? We're talking about the ways in which lots of our institutions are embedded with these kinds of logics. I'll skip ahead just for the interest of time, but I think this is a great note to end on: action, right? So it's not just about knowledge, which I think is usually what we think about when we think about college courses. It's not just about connection, if we think about that. It's action, right? So foster a shared investment in building just policies and practices. And so asking this question of, what is your definition of justice? What's in your justice toolkit? And so students talked about, the pursuit of restoration and wholeness, being seen, heard, and respected, equitable and principled treatment of all, right? So students weren't simply copying and pasting what they read in texts, right? This was, to get personal about, like, what is your definition of justice, not ex-professor's, definition of justice. And then one of my students was super precocious, right? And her justice toolkit included equity and accountability and compassion and truth seeking and restoration and collective responsibility, right? And those weren't concepts that, they emerged in our discussions and in our readings, but she took it a step further, right, to expound upon these ideas. So with that, I hope you got a good sense of how I used Braid in the class. I think that all instructors could really benefit, from spending some time using the platform, because it gives you a different kind of dimension and feel for how your students are kind of interpreting information and, co-creating knowledge. So thank you.
Thank you, Dom. And I will say, I don't know if folks on the line here have ever like audited a course, but I learned so much from reading the stories coming out of Dom's class. I mean, so and really putting the students in that position of knowledge holders, right? The students are vessels for learning, but they're also contribute to our learning as well. So I really enjoyed reading some of those stories from our class. Thanks, Don, for sharing that. Uh, Will, I think you had your hand up. All right. Well, let's
Yeah, it was just a mispress.
got you. Well, let's go ahead and move on to TF. And TF is co-president of the Tech for Social Good Student Club at University of Michigan, based out of the College of Engineering. He'll share a few ways that they're using Braid for their club.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is TF. I'm going to go ahead and just share my slides. Okay, can everybody see it? Cool. All right, so before I start, I'm going to do a little introduction about myself. So my name is TF. I'm a senior, currently studying urban technology at Tubman College, with a minor in sustainability. My kind of focus has always been on sustainable transportation. And I'm also the co-president of Tech for Social Good. We are a COE organization focusing on kind of advancing conversations, dialogues, and projects around this intersection of technology and social justice. And so, yeah, kind of a little bit about what our mission is. Basically, we aim to provide students spaces to think about how they can shift technology's role in bettering society and serving everyone equitably. So, kind of the justification of why our club got started in the first place is because of looking at STEM culture. Basically, we've started to realize that a lot of STEM discourse, whether it's in academia or the professional space, tends to be quite isolated from other kinds of disciplines. And so there's also kind of a lot of difficulties with finding resources and the appropriate space to have conversations about the kind of societal impacts that STEM projects have on our world. And even if they do have conversations, it's hard to find the kind of like actual opportunities to advance those more kind of social justice oriented projects. So what our club hopes to achieve is basically transform the STEM discourse so that it adds social and cultural context. It creates spaces for students, faculty, and everyone else to participate in kind of talking about like having conversations about how to navigate STEM culture holistically, and then creating and sharing technical opportunities, resources that kind of advance social justice in various ways. Oftentimes they are kind of bottom up and community oriented. And so we kind of started to look at Braid this past summer because we thought it would be a good opportunity to meet those visions, right? Meet those kind of mission statement. It's a platform where everyone can share stories without kind of having the toxicity of social media. It enables and then allows for genuine kind of storytelling and the kind of sharing of tacit knowledge, right? As Raymar mentioned before, the tacit knowledge part is really interesting to us because it's something that's very intangible and oftentimes not shared because just no way of doing it at the current moment. And so Braid is at least a good starting point of thinking about how we can bring those experiences, those shared experiences to life, and communicate those and make them visible to others. Because they are very valuable to whether it's kind of STEM work fields or other kinds of disciplines. And so this kind of collaboration between people of all backgrounds and disciplines is very important to us, which is why our club is not only consisting of engineering students, but also from School of Information, Public Policy, Public Health, and me from Talman College, the architecture school. And so this is very important to us, and that's why we kind of got started in Braid. So there's a couple moving parts in our student organization that are actually using the platform. One of which is the Braid project team, which Braemar has also mentioned earlier. Essentially, we pretty much look at the front end, back end of the platform, so the kind of the design of it, the user experience. But also on the other hand, we look at the kind of doing qualitative research around the user experience. So like, how are people actually using Braid, whether it's in, for example, DOM class or the classes, or for example, in our student clubs. And so part of that focus is to figure out what's working, what's not working, and improve that through kind of UX evaluation, heuristics, but also a larger kind of exploratory aspect to it, where we can look at different ways of allowing people to share those experiences, maybe multimedia kind of functions as well. The second part of our club that's using it is our reading group. This semester, we're reading Race After Technology, which some of you may have heard before, a very kind of foundational material in our club to understand the racial bias behind algorithms and kind of AI. And so we've been using that to again, advance conversations in a more kind of open space, and keeping those discussions visible for others to share and kind of braid to and respond to. The third part is our hackathon, which is actually coming up this Saturday, which I'll get into a bit more. But basically, we're using Braid to kind of guide conversations and even, extract certain elements of people's responses to act as a guiding framework for a hackathon that's focusing on the topic of civic technology and internet access. And so just some examples of how we're using Braid. I've talked about the project team. We're kind of exploring a lot of different features of how to using heuristics, usability, and UX kind of concepts to better design the platform, but also bridge conversations and what people are thinking and talking about with real world knowledge and experiences. Another example is the reading group. So just some kind of excerpts from our discussions. So we had a discussion about the role of robots and kind of their impacts on the way we think about dehumanization and racialization. That was kind of talked about in the first chapter of the book, Race After Technology. And we have people kind of braiding to it, whether it's within the reading group or from beyond the space, to add a different perspective to this kind of topic. And we feel like this kind of conversation could exist in maybe like a platform that's already out there on campus, like Canvas, for example. But oftentimes this is very much, students are not very open to this maybe kind of more personal and genuine kind of sharing of, maybe it's more personal stories or kind of experiences, and Canvas is not exactly the right platform for that. And so we hope this is a much better space for students to, and maybe even faculty, to engage in these conversations. So talking a bit more about the hackathon, again, it's kind of a themed around civic technology and alternative internet access. We have various kind of different subtracks and prompts to help student teams to develop their hack during this kind of one-day event. And so the way we're using Braid is to basically encourage people, including you guys, to share your experiences with these various topics that we put out as a kind of guiding framework for the hacks. It's also a good platform for sharing resources and potential collaborations with other kind of UN leaders and kind of pioneers in the public interest technology space. And lastly, we want this to be a reflective space as well, regarding the themes that are being explored. How can we also host a hackathon that's more suited for a wider range of students and continue to have conversations even long after the hackathon about this kind of topic, and hopefully establish longer term, whether it's internal or external partnerships. So the prompts that are being shared in this webinar is actually the prompts that will be going into the hackathon. So all of your responses that will be shared today will be very useful for the teams that will be focusing on different solutions. Think about whether it's about the digital divide or kind of responses to different crises and disasters, whether it's from a mental health or climate perspective, and even things like the open source and Creative Commons space, which is very much kind of invaded by the AI revolution. So these kind of prompts are very useful for teams to kind of use as a reference, and also maybe even case studies regarding on kind of your experiences and how you guys share them. So please do respond to these prompts whenever you can, and look forward to those responses. Kind of the last slide here. So just looking at our future work, obviously we want to continue to use Braid, but also want to facilitate more kind of conversations across departments. So whether it's faculty and students in the public policy space or across other kinds of departments, I want it to be a way that's more organic, right? To spur interactions and conversations that's very much encouraged for students and faculty. So the other aspect is the qualitative research part, which I've mentioned before. Really looking at how can create an environment online that's encouraging for people to really express who they are and define themselves, like Rema has mentioned before, but maybe in the more kind of academic space, because there's just not a lot of space for that right now, and maybe like even looking at some of the barriers to expressing these kinds of shared tacit knowledge and making them more visible and tangible. So that's pretty much it from my presentation, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Will. Thank you, TF. Raymar, I think this is the fun part now with the activity. So I'm going to let you handle it because you have the most experience doing this.
Sure, yeah. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed the talks. I know we kind of maybe breezed through some of these sections of our presentations, but definitely wanted to give you all an opportunity. And I think Will, if you want to maybe place those prompts back in the chat again, so it's fresh for
Sure.
people. I think what we can do is maybe give everyone 10 minutes or so to select one of those prompts that TF and their club's hackathon will be considering, right? As they think about problem definition, as they think about ideating and creating solutions on Saturday, your perspectives will definitely benefit their learning experience during the hackathon. So I want to give you guys some time. At the same time, let's see here. Did we place those prompts in the chat here? I believe so. At the same time, if there are any burning questions, and I'm not sure if we received any during our talks, but feel free to use this time now as well for any burning questions that you have for us. So two things. So if you are interested in practicing on Braid, um, you'll sign in first, and that's the first step. And then once you sign in, you'll be able to access those prompts, which Will has placed into the chat. And then we'll also answer some questions.
Raymar, there is a question / comment in the Q&A.
Okay, let's see here. Okay. So this one's actually from William. So as a social psychology researcher, I participated in the Young Leaders of the American Initiative 2022, where I had the opportunity to meet Raymar personally. I believe it's an excellent tool in this regard. I'm deeply inspired by certain theoretical frameworks I work with, such as the White and Episton's narrative therapy. and Maturana and ontology of language. So this is Gustavo. Gustavo, I'm not sure if you're on the line, if you want to share more of your thoughts with using Braid in in Chile. Um, but I'm not sure if he's able to come off of mute. Oh, here he is, Gustavo.
Right, Mara. I think the first comment was from Nicholas Silva,
Okay.
and then the second one is from Gustavo.
Oh, great. Oh, great. They're both from Chile, and again, as I talked earlier about building with community and bringing our community along. So thinking about how learning looks like in different countries, right? Thinking about how topics show up in different localities, right? So there's a geographic aspect of Braid, right? When you think about uh, just how these topics show up around the world. And so we not only see Braid as being something that we can use here domestically, but something that we've started to use internationally as well. Not just Chile, but in other countries as well. So the vision for Braid is to continue that sort of global outlook because we know that there's a lot of interesting things that we can learn from each other and how we're sort of grappling with different topics, wherever we're at. And so I think Nicholas and Gustavo are definitely examples of that.
Raymar, there's one question that came in along with the registrations. Are there also research, communication, and or community engagement uses for Braid? And I think this could be answered by any of you on this call today.
I think I'll yield to Dom here, in terms of the research value that you might see with Braid.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, I'm actively thinking of how I might continue to use Braid for my next course on gender sexuality and public policy, and I'll have to think about that. Right now, it's really been kind of right engaging with the research, right, that I've assigned in the course. But as a research tool, I'm wondering, Raymar, like have such kind of possibilities been explored or yeah, has anybody approached you with that
Yeah,
question?
yeah, there has, and I think with Braid, we definitely see this as a tool for participatory action research. And so how do you sort of, um, do research in the public eye, right? How do you sort of engage community members and put them in the position of not only, providing responses to some research questions, but then also the community members being able to frame and put forth questions themselves, right? And so definitely have been approached by researchers. I wish there was more to sort of point to on the platform, um, but definitely can see that as a use case. So if you are a researcher and you're looking at Braid as a way to maybe collect some of that qualitative data and really engage a community and sort of construct your research and your study with community in mind, I think Braid is a place that you could do that. Any other question?
Are there any questions from people using Braid right now?
I, I have a question for Dom if there isn't any questions, burning questions. I'm really curious with your students in terms of their experience, kind of sharing their knowledge um, in this sort of like community classroom approach. I know there's other platforms like Canvas that TF mentioned that have a discussion portal that professors and students can use. But from my understanding, it's not as social as maybe this type of storytelling on Braid is. So I'm curious
Yeah.
some of the things that you've heard from your students regarding the experience.
Yeah. I mean, I think, really what it's allowed is deeper engagement in class, not just around kind of, as an instructor, right? Like you're always hoping that did they do the readings, right? And so a part of it is, if you have to respond to the Braid prompt, right, 24 hours prior to class, and if the question, right, is designed in such a way, right, to engage the course texts, it means that they come to class better prepared, but also with kind of just, their intellectual juices kind of flowing. And I didn't talk about this in my portion of the presentation, but typically what I do is I'll share, just as I shared in the slides, right, kind of excerpts from folks' responses. And then they break out into pairs to share. And then that becomes kind of the launching point into our discussion. And I find that, in order for these ideas to become kind of more tangible and like less abstract, that especially asking questions that allow them to kind of reflect on their own observations and experiences kind of means, right, that we're not just talking about those people in those places, right? That we're talking about all of us. And so whether, you grew up on the Upper East Side, right, and have a bellman, right, and that's your experience, or you're living in the Milwaukee suburbs, right, that being able to, right, it shows actually the kind of diversity that we typically take for granted, right? And it's easy enough to say we're a diverse community, but then you get to see how diverse, but also points of connection, right? Oh, I also had SROs or the kind of school resource officers, right? In my like large public high school. So I find that, Braid has really kind of allowed, because you just don't have the time, right, when you're teaching to get into all of that. But they already come in with a kind of openness and vulnerability and a willingness to create connections between what they're reading and what they're hearing from their classmates and what they've experienced themselves.
Nice. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that like for me and even kind of auditing, I use that because of the open access nature of Braid, to be able to see those stories, it has been really edifying for me. And I really, I loved all your prompts. I think the housing policy prompt was really interesting in the sense that um, I felt like it was able to anchor those students in their hometowns, right? And I was even thinking about the prompt, and then the prompt was around like, what laws and housing policies have shaped your hometown. And I was even thinking about when I grew up, in my hometown in Ohio, like how much of that was I even aware of, right? And then I kind of forgot about it. I kind of forgot about it when I left my hometown. But seeing your students sort of excavate, maybe having to do some of that
They did.
reflection.
They actually called their parents.
Oh,
They
wow.
said, hey, mom, dad, how has the neighborhood changed over
Yeah,
time? I know you're still there and you've lived there for 30 years and I'm 20, so tell me about what that was like and how you made your housing decisions, you know?
yeah. So that's really fascinating to me, and even that piece of like, you know, using the prompt to sort of make their tacit knowledge explicit, but having to go back to their families to do some of that investigative work. I think that's really an interesting um, result, I think, of this social learning thing that we're kind of scratching at here, right? Super cool. Super cool. Wanted to acknowledge a few folks on the webinar who have contributed a braid. We have Claudia Scholes and Katie Lowe. So thank you for sharing your reflections on the prompts. Um, I, One of the things that I'm curious to hear you guys' thoughts on, and maybe for the panelists, is um, this idea of like where do we go to have like civil public discourse online? It's something that has really been front and center, I think, for me, especially, just the state of our society and kind of where we're at, and thinking about um, places that are intentional. Certainly, Braid can be one of those places where we're intentional about learning and knowledge development, and not maybe some of the other things that sort of make social media what it is today. But I'm just curious, like, to hear from you all, like, I think part of the byproduct of Braid is like maybe there's just another space where we can have like a civil discourse. It's really about learning. It doesn't have to be about anything else. And then how we sort of bring our own identity, how we sort of bring in kind of what we think about place and where we live and what we've experienced into that learning. Um, yeah, it's more of it's a comment, but it's also like a question of like, what do you all feel about like the state of public discourse in this country? And like, is there a role for technology? Is there a role for platforms like Braid, right? And others, right? That can be maybe more intentional about helping us, um, have better discourse.
Any of our attendees want to chime in, you can use the chat or the Q&A feature to leave a comment, or you can raise your hand and I could spotlight you if you wanted to speak.
I can respond. Trying to give my thoughts on that, Raymar. I think part of uh, the question around like public discourse, civic dialogue, and where they're taking place, and how can we maybe like how can Braid be a part of that? One thing I really appreciate about the platform is just how open it is. So, going back to the conversation about the distinction between Canvas and Braid, is that on Canvas or any other kind of class platform, it's very much closed. So like, and it would be like contained within a class, whereas Braid is very much open to anyone that's in a class, but also outside of that, right? Whether it's for a student club, for anyone on campus, or even beyond. And so that itself, I think, allows for just all kinds of different perspectives and opportunities to share what you think about all kinds of civic life related stuff onto a single kind of platform and even a single thread or braid. And I think that itself is very valuable. Just the ability to share in a single space across disciplines and backgrounds that people wouldn't even expect. And maybe another thing is just a thought is that um, dialogues happen in like coffee shops.
Yeah.
I have conversations with my friends about all kinds of larger societal, existential topics sometimes at a friend's place or whether it's like, right after class about something that we talked about in class. And, I feel like whether it's Braid or, maybe other similar platforms that are coming up um, could maybe be a kind of more of a digital representation of that, right? A kind of a more kind of a digital space for people to have those conversations, like you would do in a coffee shop, like you would do at a friend's place. And maybe in the future, it's a lot more kind of multimedia, where it's maybe not just in text, but one idea I thought of just now is you share a prompt and people could respond to it by just recording kind of some like a chatter or a conversation that a group of friends has and sending that on Braid or something. So it's like, it could be very much interactive in a way that's appropriate for all kinds of environments where people have these conversations. So this is more about, I guess, the how Braid could their features could maybe mimic these kinds of conversations.
Oh, thanks, TF. I love that idea too. I just noted that as well. Um, any other thoughts on that in terms of the state of public discourse. Where do we go online to have these conversations, to build knowledge with each other, to learn? I also think about Wikipedia as like this open sort of access um, environment. And in a lot of ways, I think Braid and what we're trying to accomplish here is maybe a more human version of Wikipedia in terms of it's driven from the bottom up through with stories uh, that relate to different topics. So I use that as a framework sometimes to think about Braid. But TF to your point, like it's really about like how do we capture more of the conversations that we're having along our learning journey. Dom, like, to your students' thoughts around like, where could I go to share a first draft of my thoughts, right? Um, in a way that in a place that feels like it's safe and brave. So it's good.
Raymar, we have time for one more question if you're ready.
All right. Yep, I'm ready.
All right. Someone asked if Braid uses any large language models in its process or if it's part of your development roadmap.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I feel like, you can't spell braid without AI. And I think there's a lot of tools out there that are really leaning into AI. And I think for Braid, and in terms of where we're at right now in our product life cycle, um, we're not quite there yet. We haven't rolled out the use of using AI. I know a lot of the kind of AI tools are kind of native to your browser. So I know like Google Chrome has some native AI functionality that's built in, so we can kind of adopt some of those native functionalities that already exist from the web browser without making it native on Braid, and still achieve summarizing things and helping us write better. But I think it's also this tension for us around how do we maintain authenticity while embracing AI. And so just being really prescriptive in terms of the ways that we can use it, and allowing the Braid community to help us think through that. Most importantly, um, you know, there's prompts on Braid right now about AI and how we should use it, and we're even like piloting. How do we sort of manually go through the process of performing what functionalities that AI could eventually do, right? So, people in our team have adopted certain roles. For example, like we could summarize a group of stories using ChatGPT and bring it in and have that summary. Um, but to answer your question, we haven't went down that path yet, but I think it's coming, and we just want to be responsible in terms of how we actually introduce it. Good question.
Thank you for your insight on that, Raymar. Yeah, and I think with that, we're just about approaching time. Just to wrap things up, thank you again, Raymar, Dom, TF, for sharing all of your perspectives on the development of Braid and how you've been using it within your own context. And we'd like to thank everyone else for joining. We'll be following up with some emails and further communications to just keep the conversation going and hopefully getting Braid to be used, wherever you may want to use it. So thanks again, everyone.